I have a note that we're live on Facebook right now.
Great. Okay. All right, then let's keep going. So, David, we were talking about sort of, it sounds as if that these conditions that have enabled the boogeyman to take, or the leaders to take advantage of the boogeyman, were certainly not caused by this pandemic. It's something that they're taking advantage of, as opposed to almost as if they've been waiting in the wings for this.
Well, you know, I wouldn't take it that far down the road. What I'm just saying is that careful citizens who respect the rule of law need to just be aware that there are some leaders out there that are taking advantage of this fear and this boogeyman called the virus, and potentially using it for their own political and personal advantage. And that's what I'm really positing here, is that we need to be aware of that and call that out as we see it. And, you know, particularly, and again, this is not a political commentary for those listening in on the United States, but this is about presidential power in the United States, or it could be whatever domestic power arrangements there are in any liberal democracy around the world. But in the United States, presidents have very limited power within their own countries, and it was designed that way. Overseas, presidents have almost plenary power, but in the United States, the president only has certain enumerated powers, and any other authorities given to him by the legislative branch are Congress. His enumerated powers under Article 2 of our Constitution are really straightforward. He is the executive of 1/3 of the federal government, one of the co-equal branches called the executive branch under Article 2. During times of armed conflict or war, he's also the commander-in-chief of our armed forces, period. That's his constitutional authorities. Any and all other authorities that he has to act within the continental United States are given to him by the legislature, the Article 1 branch, the Congress of the United States, which under our Constitution has enumerated powers. And also a very, very critical part of that is they make all laws necessary and proper to execute these enumerated powers. The president has a clear and direct admonition that all he does is take care that those laws given to him by Congress be faithfully executed. And so that's it. All of the rest of the powers go to the states or to the people. And that's why I consider the 10th Amendment of our Bill of Rights as really the most critical power arrangement amendment that we have. And that is, all laws that aren't enumerated in this Constitution are given to the states or to the people. And so hence we see a very frustrated, authoritarian thinking current president, and all presidents, you know, pull on the leash of power, and but this one seems to be really pulling on the leash and thinks that he has the authority to direct the states when we can open, when we can do this, when we can do that. Now he has practical and political power, but legally, constitutionally, the president cannot direct any state, because each state is its own federal, it's its own sovereign entity, and each governor is the head of their own sovereign entities. And so the president cannot direct a state to do X, Y, or Z. And so this is where we see the tension. This is also where we see a potential crunch point coming up here very, very quickly, within a week, potentially, where the president is going to make a power grab outside of the Constitution, potentially, and we have ourselves a real problem, far greater than the pandemic that we face, because at the end of the day, it goes to our basic constitutional structure of this country. You know, again, the president is sworn to uphold the Constitution. Anybody who works for the federal government, anybody that works in any government, county, state, or federal, swear allegiance to the Constitution, not to any one individual. And so it's our Constitution is also under threat, not just our populace with the virus. Of course, this is my opinion, but it's a considered opinion.
Well, and it's to go global with it as well. It's something we're certainly seeing in a lot of countries. So in Hungary, the parliament has granted some new powers to Viktor Orban. In the Philippines, Duterte has decreed his ability to do a few things. And so there are a number of places around the world where this seems, not that the pandemic isn't a legitimate fear and concern, and certainly needs some power directed at it in order to protect the citizens and the people around the globe. But there are definitely steps being taken that might be challenging to walk back from.
Well, exactly. Again, that's why I'm saying beware. Liberal democracies are not used to this arrangement or situation. The last time we had a worldwide threat to our existence was World War II. Granted, we've had epidemics, and granted, we've had challenges relating to viruses, but nothing at this grand scale equally across the globe. And so this is kind of a test for all, particularly liberal democracies, as to how they give, take, and return power to legitimately elected heads of state that aren't really used to this kind of power. And again, I'm not questioning that. We need to have some type of authorities in which to protect not just the nation, but also work together with our partners around the world. And again, this is kind of new to the United States. We haven't had this situation for quite some time. In fact, it's interesting. I'd like to just footnote here. Robert H. Jackson, as an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, wrote in his very famous concurring opinion in the steel seizure case. And this is also a good example for our viewers and listeners about what the Supreme Court has continued to say about presidential authority in the United States. President Truman at the time was concerned. We were entering into the Korean War, and the steel industry was about to go on strike. And so he actually signed an executive order, a popular thing that presidents like to do, more so recently than elsewhere, seizing the steel mills. And of course, there was various preliminary injunctions, and it worked its way very, very quickly within 5 weeks to the Supreme Court, which said, no, President Truman, you do not have that authority. Only Congress can give you that authority. And that seizure is illegal and to stand down, of which he did. Well, Justice Jackson, in his concurring opinion, said that a president, and he laid out very, very quick, very easily, you can almost graph it. He says a president who is acting without the authority of the other political branch, the Congress, is at his weakest constitutional presidential powers. And then a president that is working in conjunction with and concurrence with the legislature, he's at his highest constitutional presidential power. And of course, then he talks about the murky middle, and of course, these are the challenges that we have in the day-to-day existence of our republic. But he laid out a very, very clear pathway that presidents need to work with the Congress in order to fill their constitutional duties. And so the Supreme Court has stuck with this particular opinion in the early 1950s, the steel seizure case, and have built upon it. And it very clearly states that presidents can only execute authorities given to it by the people's branches, and that is the U.S. Congress, which makes all laws necessary and proper to execute these enumerated powers. And presidents get frustrated with this, and it's not just the current president, but all presidents push on the leash and tug on the leash based on whatever circumstances they have in front of them, in which they have to deal with. But successful presidents are the presidents that understand that I've got to work with, hand in hand with a co-equal branch, the Congress, in order to get the nation's business done. And when he's doing that, he or she is doing that, then they're at their highest constitutional presidential powers, and the Supreme Court has clearly stated and has done so, will rarely step in and question that when both political branches are working together, and will not second guess any decisions being made by a president that has the backing and working with the Congress.
I like that you added the she in there as the presidential pronoun as well. So hopefully someday, yes. And also your vast experience as a law professor really coming through in that answer. So thank you for explaining that so clearly and cleanly. The Steel Seizure case we've certainly been seeing a lot of in the press recently, as there have been a lot of discussions about the limits and the reaches of presidential power. And so I think that's it's always good to have that top of mind as one of the guiding lights as people are analyzing that.
Well, it's interesting. I was a professor. I had the privilege of being a professor at the Syracuse University College of Law after I left the United Nations as chief prosecutor for the West African Tribunal. But I practiced national security law for, goodness gracious, almost 30 years, advising presidents, ambassadors, whomever, as a senior executive on these issues, these very issues that we are currently facing now. Of course, we didn't have the pandemic, but again, the thing I think it's very, very important, even though presidents don't like to be told that they can't do something because the Constitution says you can't do it, or this particular law says you can't do it. The difference between now and in my experience is the president said, I'll follow the law. And again, this is a cautionary tale. And in my op-ed, I say that that in a different world, none of this would be that worrisome because we could always rely on a president doing the right thing under law and our Constitution. I'm concerned about the current situation. And that's why I'm saying that we need to be very careful and very cautious at the current president as he pulls on the leash or just basically bites off the leash and runs amok. I'm very, very concerned about that. So I don't think that this is fantasy. I don't think this is too far out of the realm. But again, I don't want to turn this into a political conversation because I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about what the law is and what the practical realities of where we are right now.
So what are some of the things then as liberal democracies are analyzing and moving forward? What are some of the things that strike the right balance between giving an executive the power he or she needs in this moment, but then also ensuring that that it's not going to potentially go awry? So is it things like a duration clause? Is it some other check or balance? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, again, we can come at this at various angles. We can come at it politically as far as a sense of calmness and leadership and direction. That tends to move things in a way that both parties or both branches of our government, legislature and executive, would move in a direction if they understood where that direction was and why that was. And so that allows then the branch that actually gives the authority to that president under these circumstances, gives them the ability to pass all laws necessary and proper for him to do that because they understand where we're going, why we're doing this, and when. That makes it a lot easier. Just that in and of itself, it's just called calm, reasoned leadership, developing a plan that doesn't change on a daily basis or a whim in front of a microphone, but a calm, deliberate process led by individuals who know exactly what's going on, where they're going, giving a blueprint to the states and how the federal government will assist them. But really, at the end of the day, it will be the state governors working these issues with the support of the federal government and the calm assurance of a president saying that here's where we need to be as a nation working together. We're going to give each state, based on its challenges, the things they need in order to get through this, and that we'll get through this together, as opposed to this ping pong ball approach where nobody knows what's going on. And then governor's doing what they constitutionally have a right to do anyway, and that is doing their jobs under the Constitution, because again, the 10th Amendment says that this is a state issue, but they're not getting the calm assurances, just the threats of a challenged president who is using, and this is where all of a sudden I became concerned and wrote the op-ed, was because I realized that he is starting, or he did for a while there. I'm not sure if he's doing it now because the governors were calling him out, but he was using whatever the federal government can lawfully give to the states based on this challenge. He was using it as a power source. In other words, if you support me, in fact, I think he even said, I'm not being appreciated enough by the governors. And so the governors that were calling for an appropriate support by the federal government and calling the president out did not get an immediate assistance. And of course, what did he call the Michigan governor, that woman? Mm-hmm. And again, this is not what we need. This is where I began to become concerned at many levels, but one of which is that he fully doesn't understand his constitutional limits to power, which are considerable. He can only act based on what the Congress gives him, and even in a situation such as this. Now, it's interesting. Your readers probably don't know this. Some do, but the president only has plenary power inside the United States if there is an invasion or an insurrection. Period. That's it. The rest of it is given to him by various authorities. The Stafford Act and other things give him certain authorities to deal with national emergencies, of course. And I don't want to go too far down the legal term because I don't want to turn this into a law lecture, but your listeners just need to understand that we're talking about a position, the presidency of the United States, with limited power within the United States, only the ones given to him by the Congress. And he has to take care that those laws are faithfully executed. And such as this challenge we have with the World Health Organization of just taking legally appropriated dollars by the Congress of the United States and stopping that appropriation, starting to border on the illegal, and it could be a violation of the Anti-Deficiency Act, which is a criminal statute. So again, these are just all interesting challenges as presidents tug and pull on that constitutional leash. I just don't want to see this president snap that leash and run amok and hurt not just our ability to face the virus, but also just the fundamental basis by which we govern this republic.
Well, so I guess that leads to the natural question of, if the tugging does get too hard or does try to stretch the leash beyond its capabilities, what are the potential ways that the legislative and judiciary branches at that point can try and pull that back, or are there ways to re-snag the leash?
Well, that's a difficult question, and it's a good question. And it's a question that we need to be asking ourselves, because the founders of our republic who drafted this Constitution never contemplated a president that had no respect for that Constitution. There's very little checks and balances like that in the system. The ultimate check is the Congress, both the Senate and the House of Representatives. And we're seeing that that's playing out in ways that are challenging in and of itself. And so that's how it's done. I mean, absent, and I'm not even going to mention the word, but I would hate to see states become so concerned with this leash snapping that they start acting on their own, ignoring the federal authority. In fact, we're already seeing this just a little bit in the sense of the states in New England and Pennsylvania are banding together to work together to solve this problem. We also see the same thing out west in an appropriate domestic legal way, but they're starting to move beyond the challenge of an uninformed president. And this could lead to some challenges within the week. He's already threatening many things, to include something that has never been done before, and that is threaten to disband Congress, which he can do technically under the Constitution, but is why the Congress never adjourns, because they don't want to make sure when they leave out of session that they're out of town, that all of a sudden we have a president that sees ultimate power. Again, these are just things that are happening today in the past couple of years, and recently we're seeing challenges to a constitution that we have never seen before. But again, the bottom line is that our founders just assumed that we would always, presidents aren't perfect. We have good presidents and bad presidents, and we've had presidents who have violated the law. Richard Nixon did, and he was removed. Yep. But even Richard Nixon had a respect for his oath and the Constitution. And our founders never contemplated a president who would not have respect for the very document of which they swore before the entire nation and the world to protect and defend. So that's a problem for us. We're not, we're uniquely not geared for that. Again, this is a cautionary tale to our listeners that we need to be mindful of all of this, because I am concerned. I cannot think that it would go that far, but I've been surprised year after year these past years about what was never possible become possible.
Yeah, and so it sounds as if, some of the power dynamic changes that we've been talking about aren't just in what we traditionally think of as the more authoritarian regimes or the dictatorships or things like that. These are shifts that nearly all countries and all leaders and all citizenry are dealing with at this point, and hopefully keeping an eye on, to be mindful of. I think it might be hard to recognize what is that step right before it's too far. And so, it's a challenging thing to keep an eye on.
Well, it is. And as this plays out, we've seen indications. You've mentioned the problem with Hungary. We've seen some maneuvering by the current prime minister of Israel, kind of maneuvering himself, trying to avoid a loss of power. And also, as he is under indictment, extending his time in office to develop potential political possibilities to avoid this. So again, it's a matter of character. Character counts, character matters, and respect for the law matters. And if you don't have the character or the respect for the law, regardless of whether we have all kinds of checks and balances, we're walking into a situation that is not just a challenge as far as a terrible virus, but we're also shaking liberal democracies a bit, to where at the end of this, when we come out of this, we may have stronger authoritarians in various governments and a weakening of democracy around the world. This could be collateral damage. I hope not. I am hopeful that it won't be. But as citizens, we just have to be mindful of this and use the Constitution, which we're all sworn to protect and defend, and to ensure that all our governmental entities base all of their decisions on the Constitution and not on our personal or political gain.
So if we are to take a look around the world, and let's say there are some places where this power consolidation is taken too far. Are there mechanisms internationally that could help address these, or do these limits or do these power shifts have to become so egregious that's only when there might be some justification in stepping in?
Well, again, as we take this up to the international level, and the 75-year geopolitical arrangement that has kept peace and security throughout the world since 1945, the United Nations paradigm, Again, the drafters of the United Nations always realize that it's not a perfect world and there's going to be stresses and strains, but the whole United Nations paradigm is based on the rule of law. And as we see more larger countries or more politically powerful countries begin to indicate that they are challenging the rule of law, both domestically but also internationally, the United Nations is not geared to just correct that. There's no checks and balances per se, other than a few odds and ends within the charter itself related to the UN itself, General Assembly, Security Council, Secretary General kind of things. You know, the UN isn't geared also to watch or to deal with heads of state or member states begin to step away from the rule of law. And, you know, this challenges the whole fundamental United Nations paradigm that we have been living under, that has got us through the threat of the Cold War that we've been living under. So again, you know, all of these international and domestic structures that we're talking about are based on rule of law. And when we have strongmen or individuals who are authoritarian in nature, have no respect for that law or use that law for their own personal gain or political advantage, you know, we don't have a lot of fallback because the presumption was the rule of law. And this is my concern related to this age of strongmen as they move into more nationalistic and populistic approaches to everything. This fundamentally hurts all international institutions, from both the United Nations, International Criminal Court, various regional arrangements, even just the very cornerstone principle of preserving peace and security in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It's all beginning to chip away at the edges, fray at the edges, because of this outwardly perception that the rule of law is being challenged. We have to stick to the rule of law or we are in trouble. And I just hope that the rule of law is not the ultimate victim of this terrible virus that we're facing.
Yeah, this is so. In one of my first teas, I had talked about how the phrase "the rule of law" has become somewhat problematic for me as I'm learning more about the era in which Justice Jackson worked, because technically in Germany, what was happening was under the rule of law because the laws had been changed. And so there's, you know, we tend to assume that the rule of law has that positive connotation, that the laws themselves are just and appropriate. And then when those laws change, that we lose a little bit of our footing, or when someone completely, you know, usurps that power, that just changes the connotation of it.
You know, Robert Jackson took the idea of the rule of law domestically and showed the world that internationally, the rule of law can be a stabilizing force and a better way by which we approach all of our challenges. Up to that point, we were very nationalistic oriented. We had very, very few alliances, and it was pretty much countries working within themselves or with various individuals, but there was not a lot of multilateralism. Robert H. Jackson in London on 8 August of 1945, of which we'll celebrate the 75th anniversary, along with various other countries, said, look, why don't we use the rule of law to show that we can correct this horror that took place in a way that we can build a platform, which we did, Nuremberg principles adopted by the United Nations, and take that and build a better world. And for 75 years, though it hasn't been a perfect world by many ways, the Cold War really negated a lot of the idea, but then we picked it up again after the fall of the Soviet Union, and hopefully we can continue to maintain it. You know, we did a fairly good job, but again, Robert Jackson, when he stood there in his opening statement and said, this is how we're going to deal with this kind of thing, and that is through law, was a powerful message. And I don't think the world fully understood it until after the Cold War ended and we began to take that principle and use it to build what I call the age of accountability between 1993 and 2015, where we actually held heads of state accountable for what they've been doing and to their societies and their countries. It has kind of come to an all stop, sadly, with this age of a strong man. And then as the international order seems to be weakened by these various individuals who are looking at the world from a nationalistic, populistic prism, as opposed to an international global village prism, which we had up until about 2015. We can still return it, but again, these are all just cautionary tales. Because the question is, are these authoritarian individuals capable of facing down a true threat to mankind? And that is man's only predator, and that is the virus.
Yeah, that's interesting. All right, why don't we open it up to some audience questions? Let's see if we have any. I'm going to rely on Nicole for this because I am having some trouble seeing the Facebook live stream. So Nicole, let us know if we have any questions. And David, what kind of coffee are you drinking? How do you take your coffee?
I'm a Keurig guy. It's too easy. So I have a lot of Keurigs. Javalia is one of my favorites. And I have they even now have espresso machines that are very much like Keurig cups. And so all of a sudden, having a cappuccino, having an espresso, or just a regular cup of coffee becomes all too easy. But it's surprisingly good. It's not perfect. I still miss my European cappuccinos and espressos, the world's best coffees. Yep. But it's okay.
Yep. Yeah, because it's been snowing here in Jamestown for about the last 48 hours on and off. I was trying to get myself into a summer mood. So I like a lot of peach tea in the summer. So I made myself a hot version of peach tea, just to try and evoke warmth and summer.
Indeed, my deputy at the War Crimes Tribunal in West Africa, the Special Court, was Sir Desmond de Silva, the late Sir Desmond de Silva, Queen's Counsel. And at 4 o'clock every day that we were both in town, we would have tea and biscuits at 4 o'clock in his office, and we would talk about the day and challenges and those kind of things. I became a tea drinker. And enjoyed it immensely, and was amazed at how many different types of tea there are. Delighted, actually. Anyway, enjoyed it immensely. So I look forward to hearing other people's perspectives and questions.
So we could get a question from Helena. So my apologies for not knowing how to pronounce that. So her question is, procedurally, who would bring the charges of an Anti-Deficiency Act violation regarding the freeze on funding to the WHO? So who?
Yeah, well, that's an Anti-Deficiency Act violation is usually done by the U.S. attorney of that particular district that violation was taking place. But when a president commits an Anti-Deficiency Act, or those who work for him related to that, becomes a bit of then we have a little bit of a political issue there. Then it gets into the question of, is a violation of the Anti-Deficiency Act, which we've already gone over one time. It was led to the president's impeachment. That's usually, you don't indict a sitting head of state president. It's just, again, it's never been done before, only because we've never contemplated presidents committing crimes while in office. But he did allegedly with essentially an Anti-Deficiency Act problem in the challenges with Ukraine. If he fails to faithfully execute the law, which is the proper appropriation of monies to the World Health Organization, which, by the way, we created back in the 40s, or not in the 40s, but we helped. We were the leading country in creating this. If he fails to take those monies, there are procedural ways which he can go back to Congress and have those funds reprogrammed and ask for authority to use that money for something else. But he just can't stop paying somebody for something that he signed into law and then just walked away from it. So procedurally, an Anti-Deficiency Act violation it's a federal crime. So a U.S. attorney in that particular district where the crime was committed would have generally the jurisdiction to decide what to do with that, whether to prosecute or not. When we have a sitting president who commits a crime, then it becomes a lot more constitutional. Then it's up to the Congress of the United States, starting in the House of Representatives, whether they want to take that and do something about that. Regardless, it just sends a terrible signal. Again, the challenges that I've been talking about all afternoon is presidents should respect the law and the Constitution, not violate it.
Yep. And then
I hope I answered the question.
Well, I'm sure we'll hear if you did not. But we also had a comment from Jeremy who said that this was really interesting. He struggles a bit with how does one hold these strong men accountable? So, if it's something that seems to be a little bit out of the power of the average person. So it's sort of perhaps one of those great unknowns as to how to hold these strong men accountable.
Well, it's interesting. We do have a regime. We have the jurisprudence. We have the rules of procedure and evidence. We have the experience to hold heads of state accountable if they commit international crimes. I took down a sitting head of state for violations of international law, war crimes and crimes against humanity. So we can do that. And that's how we hold heads of state who violate international law. Domestically, it depends on the jurisdiction of how to deal with that. In the United States, to remove a president from office, you either have to not vote for him and he's not elected, or impeach him and then go to the Senate for a potential removal. That's it. Yep. Until after he leaves office. And then, of course, all bets are off. But we've never had that situation. Again, this is all first ever kind of scenarios, horrific to contemplate. But the question is that if and when our current president leaves office, what kind of criminal liability can he face? Yep.
And that will be an interesting question moving forward. Helena said, yes, thank you. Your answer was very comprehensive to her question.
Oh, great. Great. Other questions or thoughts? I value your perspective. I'm just one American who has a perspective, and these are all my perspectives. So you certainly would have them too. So I would value any kind of thoughts or perspectives you might have in the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. So while we're waiting to see if we have any more people who share with that, I'll share mine. I think my hope always is that people understand how important voting is. And I know we fluctuate in this country in some surprisingly small number sometimes as to the percentage of people who vote in each election. But that really is one of the most fundamental ways, possibly the most fundamental way for the American populace to be able to express how they're hoping the country will shape itself. And so, as we move forward, if there are people who think President Trump is dealing with this in the best way possible, then I hope that they go out and vote in the way they feel. And for the people who feel otherwise, I hope that they go out and vote the way they feel. And so I think just part of that importance is get out and vote, like actually exercise that right.
The 10th Amendment to the Constitution, which I keep harping on, which is an amazing addition to a great document, says, if it's not enumerated in this Constitution, which is really a contract with the American people saying, if you give us these powers, then we will protect you. And those powers aren't completely developed. And so they gave all the rest of the powers, governmental powers, not just to the states, it says, but also to the people. So the ultimate authoritative power in the United States of America is us. And we have the ultimate power. It's called the power of voting. And it's a powerful weapon. And all authority stems from that. So again, I agree with you very much that the power to vote, the privilege of being able to wield that power given to us by the 10th Amendment is significant. And we need to use that power in whatever way we feel necessary. That's up to the individual American, but use that power to make this country better.
Well, David, it doesn't look like we have any more questions or comments at this time. So I'm going to say thank you very much for chatting with me today. I enjoyed our conversation. And for those of you who are interested in what's coming next, so next week we will be talking about the characterization of the COVID-19 virus as the China virus, and what sort of divisions and repercussions that's having for certain people in the United States and actually around the world as well. We'll be talking with Dr. Robert Tsai from American University's Washington College of Law. And so look forward to seeing you all next week. And David, thank you very much.
Thank you all. And it's a real pleasure chatting with you. All the best. And stay home.
Yes, and stay healthy. Thanks, David.
Bye-bye.